Hi, my name is Grant MacDonald. I'm Director of Experian's Fraud and AML Strategic Initiatives. And today I'm going to talk to you about FRAML. Last year we witnessed a new portmanteau being introduced into the financial crime vocabulary, FRAML. It stands for Fraud and Anti-Money Laundering, and it reflects the industry's growing trend integrating fraud and AML teams together to better fight financial crime more effectively. You see, fraud and AML, they're not separate issues, they're interlinked. Criminals will often use fraud to obtain illicit funds, and they'll need to use the financial system to clean and launder that money. So by way of an example, imagine we've got Bob. Bob is a professional fraudster, and he's targeting UK telcos and computer firms to obtain high-end mobile phones and computers. Now, one of the telcos spots what Bob is doing and reports him to a national fraud database. Could be CIFAS or National Hunter. Bob, however, has been quite successful, and he starts to sell these goods through the black market, and he amasses quite a healthy sum of cash. However, he can't deposit that in his bank account without arousing suspicion. So Bob needs to think about new creative ways of laundering that money so he can enjoy the spoils of his crime. At this point, we can now see that Bob is on a national fraud database and therefore has a fraud marker. And the bank similarly having a look at any changes in payment behaviours. So by bringing the intelligence from fraud teams and AML teams together, it'll be much easier to spot this nefarious activity. The last year we integrated our previously separate fraud and AML businesses together. That's led by Tristan Prince. I'm joined by Tristan today just to answer some questions about the rationale for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'm going to start out by, painting a bit of a picture, Grant, and that picture is about the level of fraud within the UK at the moment. So we know now today that 1 in 17 adults in the UK has been impacted by fraud in the last 12 months. We know that fraud is over 40% of all the reported crimes. We know, in fact, that the UK government has now upgraded fraud to a matter of national security, and that means it has the same level of focus as terrorism and other serious civil unrest. Fraud has been taken extremely seriously at government level within the UK. The velocity of fraud that we're seeing at the moment is unprecedented. And I think what we also observe with fraud is the predicate offence to money laundering. The funds that are being generated by the fraud that's being committed is going to need to find a home. So there's a logical flow through of the amount of fraud that we see in the UK to the impact on AML. So currently we know organisations are really struggling. They're struggling with the fact that a lot of the checks they're doing are very manual in their nature. They're swivel chair operations where they need to move from one system to another. And this is the same problem that we had many years ago from a fraud perspective. So at Experian, the reason that we're bringing fraud and AML together is actually because we see the same sort of problems in the AML space that we've seen historically in the fraud space. In fact, data is a mission critical element in solving the problem with money laundering, as is the ability to analyse and use that data proactively. So for me, this logical flow through is as a result of the velocity of fraud that we're seeing out in the marketplace today and the implications on the AML side.
Tristan, so it's been about 12 months since we initiated this change. Can you take us through any early benefits that we've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a raft of data at Experian through many years of helping organisations to prevent fraud. So in the UK, again, giving you a data point, £1.8 billion worth of fraud prevented in the UK for our clients using that data. That data, from a fraud perspective, is really useful, but to really unpick the value, you should begin to look at how that can be applied in money laundering. The fraud data that we hold today is the key that will unlock the ability to find networks, associations, links, and further risk in the AML space as well. So data is going to be really critical, but also within that data is the ability to solve some of the problems that we see on the money laundering side as well. So I'll give you an example, which is money mules. So we know that money mules is a massive problem in the UK, and effectively that's where individuals are either wittingly or unwittingly approached to use their bank accounts to transfer illicit funds. We have used the data that we've been able to collate on the fraud side of our business to build models that are predictive of money mule behaviour, and they will allow organisations to spot where transfers are being made to money mule accounts, or potentially people are setting up accounts specifically for the purpose of money muling. The other example I would give as well, with the recent changes with the payment services regulator, particularly around the regulation around authorised push payment fraud, is again, we're looking at the data sources and data services that we have on the fraud side to see, is there anything more that we could do to spot some of the telltale signs of APP fraud, i.e. where people are transferring funds to an account that we know is associated to nefarious individuals or nefarious outcomes.
So on the 26th of October, the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act was passed. What do you think that impact will be for that in the context of FRAML?
I think that's, I mean, first and foremost, it's a really fantastic step forward, I think. And it really shows, you know, to my point earlier, the government beginning to really take financial crime seriously in the UK. I think the exciting thing about the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Bill is that it opens up the opportunity for organisations to share the outcome of those investigations. My anticipation is that will effectively allow people to begin to share that data and actually benefit from the investigations that other organisations have done, which I think actually will have a multiplying effect on opening up the view from an AML perspective. I guess one of the other future states that we're working towards is around the Fraud and AML Bureau, so the FRAML Bureau. It's this convergence between fraud and AML. We're seeing that within a lot of the major banks, so they're beginning to bring their fraud and AML teams together. The reason they're doing that is because they're sharing data and insights and using the same tools and same methodologies as well. So the FRAML Bureau piece for me is really exciting. Essentially, this is going to allow organisations to share data points around the investigation that they do when they're onboarding a new customer, and that could be a commercial entity, could be a consumer that they're onboarding onto their account. So one element is sharing of the due diligence process that goes into it. That's really exciting. The next bit is economic crime data sharing, and that's exactly what's being underpinned by the Corporate Crime and Transparency Act. So effectively allowing organisations to begin to share the outputs of their investigations where they've offboarded customers or had to restrict products and access to them as well. The next exciting thing for me is combining that data with other data that's out there in the world today. So at Experian, you know, we have a large credit bureau which has a lot of information about individuals and businesses which can be used to further enhance that data to look for links and associations which could further uncover economic crime. And then the final bit, which is always interesting to me, is FRAML analytics. Essentially that hybrid crossover between the fraud data points that we have today, the signs from an AML perspective that may be indicative that someone is money laundering. I think FRAML analytics begins to unlock the value in the data and the links and associations, and again that network will be expanded. So in the future, for me, from an AML perspective, is you have many organisations sharing their data and sharing the outcome of their investigations. You have organisations like Experian linking that data together, enriching it with additional data points and insights that really begin to open up the network. So I'm hopeful that overall we'll have a really positive impact.
Thank you for joining us, Tristan. If you want to understand a little bit more about this, you can find out more on experian.co.uk.